This is In Conversations with Chana. I'm Chana Weisberg, and I am joined tonight by a very courageous couple. We're joined tonight by the Estrins, Rabbi Eli and Chaya Rachel Estrin. They are the authors of a book called Of Medicine, Miracles, and Mindsets, One Family's Fight for Their Baby's Life and the Lessons Learned Along the Way. First, let me tell you a little about this couple, this strong and courageous couple. Rabbi Eli and Mrs. Chaya Rachel Estrin directed the Chabad at University of Washington in Seattle for 13 years. Rabbi Estrin is a chaplain with the rank of captain promotable in the U.S. Air Force Reserve, and in his full-time civilian job, he serves as the shliach to Jews in the U.S. military under the Aleph Institute. That's quite a bio for you guys. Welcome, welcome. Thank you for joining us. Say hello to everybody. Huh?
It's our pleasure.
Our pleasure. Thank you. Thank you so much for being here, and I'm sure this will be a very inspirational interview. So you have written this book, and because you went through a tremendous situation, tremendous circumstance, where you actually had to fight for your child's life. Can you tell us a little about this? What exactly are you writing about? What did you go through?
Okay, who's starting?
You start.
All right. So the story really begins before our son was born. This is our sixth child. When we were told that we were given a diagnosis in utero of complex congenital heart disease as well as other defects. And so we were given the information that the chances were that he would not be able to survive birth at all, and that if he would survive, it would be for a matter of hours, and even if he survived any past that, he would be a vegetable. That was 9 weeks before the baby was born, and from that point they were really kind of pushing us to speak to the Chevra Kadisha, the Jewish Burial Society. They were asking us to plan for his last moments and that kind of thing. So that was really the first stage of the story, was really trying to decide how we were going to deal with this ourselves. How do we take this information? How do we get ourselves prepared for any eventuality? And most importantly, how do we take the Hasidic insights that we were trained in, and how do we apply them to a situation that we were told is basically fatal? So that's really.
I mean, that's a huge thing to be struck with, that information. What was your reaction when you were told this about the baby in vitro?
So initially, obviously shock, and then it was sort of, let's see what we can do. Sort of, you get that urge to fight. And trying to sort of decipher all the information and figure out what's our plan of action, and sort of, it was a little bit of a wait and see game because we had 9 weeks until birth to wait and see, but that was really, I think, our initial reaction.
Yeah, I think that was really, the shock was the first stage, and then you really go into the stage of, what do I do with this information? How do I react? How should I be reacting? How do I prepare myself, and what do I do? And the 9 weeks ended up being a successive series of battles, so to speak, each one to wage by itself to try to assess the situation from a Hasidic viewpoint, in which there's a famous saying, "Tracht gut, wird sein gut," that you should think good, and that itself creates a conduit for there to be goodness. So while we were, on the one hand, recognizing the seriousness of the situation, but at the same time, we wanted to apply this idea. And then an even more important idea to be able to apply was the fact that God can really do whatever he wants. Mm-hmm. And so we wanted to allow, so to speak, God to be able to make any positive opportunities arise, so to speak. So we went through a series of plans to be able to try to allow that to happen. And I know that sounds really, really strange, but the concept really is that when you give up, you're not allowing for any positive eventualities. On the other hand, when you give yourself a positive mindset and you use concrete methods to be able to access some kind of positive eventuality, then if God so wills it, then you can be able to access that. If we
So,
had thought negative the entire time, I don't believe that we would have had any positive eventuality.
so would some people look at that as being unrealistic? Would you say that, what would you say to that? If some people would say, oh, you're being just so optimistically unrealistic about the situation, or is it more than that?
I mean, I think we tried to strike a balance and do both. So we kind of were living two parallel lives at the same time. Whereas one hand, we were trying to prepare ourselves practically for the fact that the doctor said there was no chance for him to survive and prepare our children. At the other hand, also set up any scenarios so that if things could go well, if things would be different, that we would have set up any chance for there to be a miracle. So, we things like we took on mitzvot in honor of this baby, and we went to the Rebbe's gravesite and prayed, and we we made sure that we set up certain situations so after birth, if he would survive birth, that we would repeat the testing so that would be a guaranteed same diagnosis as prenatally. So we sort of set up things on both sides at the same time. We also weren't trying not to be delusional and not accept the fact that this is a fatal diagnosis. And the other thing that we also tried to do is fill ourselves. One of the things, at least for me, that was really important to remind myself the whole time, and we were speaking to the doctors about this as well, is that, every moment that Hasidic philosophy believes that every moment that a child or a soul and a body are united has purpose. And we don't know what a person's purpose is. And it could be for a few moments, or it could be for 120 years or somewhere in between. And for every moment, we can't say this person's life is not worthwhile, even for a few moments. So we try to also remember that even if this child's life, is going to be what it was predicted, which was, nothing or a few minutes, that's not for no purpose and no reason.
Wow.
So
when I was reading, you write in the book, at the center of our hopes and fears, we place these two ideas. One, God can do anything, and because of that, two, think positive. You admit that the second idea was hardest. So I found that so wow, you're given this bombshell of news, and yet you're working on that positive thinking. And then you write, we began a series of plans, medically as well as spiritually. Parallel to these physical preparations, our spiritual warfare had already begun in earnest. Usually when people are struck with such news, they kind of just, aren't sure where to land. And I found that so grounded that you were actually able to think straight and actually strategize on what you wanted to do and actually plan in a positive way what you were working on. How did you manage to do that?
It's very much there's an element of training, so to speak, that we're given, and we're not given it in these parameters, but we're filled with stories and ideas, concepts, and they become very esoteric at a certain point, but they all end off with the idea that everything needs to have a practical, relatable element. So here we had taught these ideas for years. We'd been directing Chabad at University of Washington at that point for 11 and a half or 12 years or whatever it had been. And been talking about these things, and I felt very, very much that, okay, now we have to apply them ourselves.
Wow.
It would be kind of, I don't want to say
kind of human to not.
To be honest, I can't say that the second we heard the diagnosis, we were like, oh yeah, we're all positive.
Right.
There was definitely
Of course.
time to sort of process, and we were definitely thrown off kilter, and I would say we were reeling, and then we had to kind of rally back, and even throughout that period there was definitely ups and downs, and we didn't always have them at the same time. At times one of us was up and one of us was down, and vice versa, but it was sort of like, it was almost like, what other choice do we have? Like, we can choose to be depressed and upset, or we can try to find some silver lining that will maybe keep us up a little bit. And it was almost like a lifeline to have some sort of positive like message, outlook, philosophy, I guess is really the right word, just because then at least you feel like I wasn't just abandoned in some, rocky ocean. But and this is something that I think really has become, ironically, my belief that God cares about every person, or our belief, but and that things don't just happen because we have good luck or bad luck, has been strengthened through this process, because I had to lean on that to get through the tough times. If that makes sense.
Right. No, for sure. Wow.
Like, I recognize that I don't see everything, but I know that there's someone, whatever, bigger out there that's directing the show. And so I just have to trust and believe,
So I think that's what Rachel is saying is very, very, very true. And specifically, after each one of the doctor's visits, when they would ask us, okay, so did you call the burial society and stuff like that? It really, really knocked us off course, and we had to work really hard to get back to the place we wanted to be. So I think that the way, if you want to look at it as a continuum, so to speak, we were hit by this news, and you reel from the shock, and then afterwards you say, okay, how do I deal with this? So first you go through the intellectual process. Well, I know that this is what I should be believing. I know that this is what I should be doing. And then afterwards you kind of apply that into the reality of life. And then afterwards, if the emotions come, they come. And if not, then at least you know that intellectually this is where I want to be. So I mean, like, practically speaking, so the Rebbe gave many pieces of advice to people, and oftentimes he tell people very, very practical things. Sometimes it was very spiritual stuff. So the practical stuff was get a second opinion, speak to a doctor who's a friend. And in our case, that second one was warped by the fact that the doctor, unfortunately, was really coming from a different universe than we were, and that created the second part of the story, if you want to put it that way. But having those outlets was a very, very important part of it, because it wasn't just us sinking in a whirlpool. We had somewhere to aim for. So those were the practical sides of things, and then the spiritual sides of things were check the mitzvot, like Rachel mentioned before, add in mitzvot, add in the connection as much as we could. Find these outlets. Shabbat for us was extremely, extremely important, because we had to create Shabbat for ourselves and for our children, to be able to create that atmosphere. It was not just expected; we had to create it ourselves, and so we had to go into a space that we weren't in. We weren't in that emotional space. We had to dive into it and be there. And I think that those kinds of things, looking back, were extremely, extremely healthy, because they didn't allow us to get swallowed up by the whirlpool of doom and despair and just give up.
Interesting. So you're basically saying that you had this intellectual mindset that helped you through it, and that kind of forced you to try to feel it emotionally. Like this is really a study of Chassidus in practice. You were using your intellect to convey certain things to your emotions, and then you set up a circumstance around you for your children and for yourselves that kind of forced you into that position. That's what it sounds like.
That's exactly what it was. And that's
Wow.
why the book is called Of Medicine, Miracles, and Mindsets, because we felt that the story itself is one thing, but as integral as the story itself, maybe even more integral. I don't know. I'm not the one to rate things over here, but to us, at least, just as important, or even more important, was the fact that it was these ideas that really drove us through the entire experience.
And that's exactly why we chose his name. Before he was born, we chose the name Netanel, which means God gives, because we wanted to remind ourselves that was the belief we had, whether we liked what he was giving us or not, that this was from God. And so that was the reason why we chose that name, was as a practical reminder of what we wanted to feel.
And then the flip side of that was, once he was born, we were trying to decide on a nickname, and we decided the nickname Nissi, because Nisanel in the Ashkenazic pronunciation ends up being the Nis sound. And so Nissi means my miracle. And we told the doctors that, and the nurses, whoever was around, that we're asking for a miracle. And so therefore the name that we're choosing, the nickname that we're choosing, is kind of representing this. And that was, again, our way of trying to implant these ideas into our world, and to ask.
I just want to show this picture of this little miracle baby that was actually born against the doctor's warnings and against their dire warnings, right? He was born. Sorry, go ahead. Yeah, it was interrupting you.
No, you weren't.
Oh, okay. Okay, so this is your beautiful baby. I know you say in the book also that you told the doctors, when they kept telling you all these doom prophecies, that you told them that the doctors have been given permission by God to heal, but not to cause hopelessness with predictions. And you told them, let's focus on the healing element and leaving the future to God. And you consistently refused to talk about death, insisting that Judaism is life-obsessed, not death-obsessed. So that must have taken a lot of courage to stand up against the whole medical team, medical environment, and their warnings and all that they were telling you.
Well, I don't know if it took courage to stand up. It was more about advocacy. We understood that we needed to create a direction. We felt that as parents, it's our necessity to be able to drive the direction, as opposed to be driven. And that was, thank God, that was a correct assessment. And I think that's one of the things that we try to tell people as much as possible, is that you need to advocate. It's not enough just to be a bystander in the medical process. You really need to be part of the decision making, because not everything about the medical decision making is necessarily with your specific benefit. That's just an unfortunate reality of today's medicine, is that there's a lot that goes on besides for the individual patient, and we need to be involved with it. So we felt the urgency in that, and in theory, the medical team agreed, but I think they were certainly coming from a certain approach, and they were trying to also humor us, shall we say.
Well, tell us a little bit more what happened. So first they were giving you these warnings, and then what happened? Let's hear the rest of the story.
Go for it.
So he was born, and the condition was sort of that he'll be born, and we'll redo all the testing, and based on if the testing is the same as they said prenatally, there's no surgical option for his combination of heart and GI defects.
And I guess you should probably we haven't mentioned any of that, so why don't you explain his defects so that people understand them.
Sure.
So my wife is the cardiologist in the family. She doesn't have her degree from a university.
I'm in training.
Exactly. She'll correct if I get this slightly incorrect. So basically, he has 3 of the 12 heart defects that are considered critical. And the first one is that he only has a right ventricle. He does not have a left ventricle. The other 2 are actually more extreme than that, because you've got, of course, the heart needs to pump blood to the lungs, and the lungs need to oxygenate it and send it back to the heart, which pumps it out to the rest of the body. So that system actually wasn't in the heart, because you have what's called pulmonary atresia, which means that the valve that should allow the heart to pump blood to the lungs was a solid mass, and it was not an operating valve. And the veins that carry oxygenated blood from the lungs to the heart actually went into the liver. So they also were basically not functional. So that was, all of that is basically really, really, really extreme when you're talking about congenital heart disease. And then the
So
other things,
this was the prognosis that they told you before he was born, or once he was born? This is
this before he was born.
before he was born.
So we knew that he would need, even in a best of case scenario, he would need immediate heart surgery, which they couldn't give us any positive predictions on it because of the complexity
And
the combination of these very serious heart defects. So that was on one side, and then you had what they were looking at prenatally. They were looking at a GI system that was either severely flawed or non-existent, because they weren't sure if the esophagus and the trachea were either fused or they didn't reach the stomach. They couldn't find the stomach on the ultrasound. So basically, with all of these major GI problems on top of the major cardiac problems, they're like, okay, there's no way for this kid to be able to function. There's nothing that we can do surgically to be able to fix it.
Right. Also, because they told us prenatally that there are fixes for the heart, there are fixes for the GI, both of them super complex and not necessarily positive outcome, but for the two systems to be not working, you really need to have one working well to let the other one need such severe surgery to be even possibly successful. So what they told us is those two combinations of systems so deformed, there's no chance that they can fix all of that and have a survival rate. That's basically what they told us.
Wow.
So we got a second opinion. We did the tests again, and then we sat down with the rabbi and accepted the fact that you don't have to do surgery.
I think we just lost you. You just froze up. I think we're going to wait for the estrins to try to come back, because they're seems like they just froze up on us. So we'll wait a couple minutes for, okay, there you guys are. Okay, turn it off, and then they'll be back. So here again is the picture of their baby when the baby was born. And okay, that's okay. Let's just find you. Hold on. Just showing the picture. There we go. Okay. And you're coming on. Okay. There we go. Okay.
You lost us.
So we lost you when you were explaining what the doctors were saying. And then, okay, let's just hide this. So yeah, we lost you when you were explaining what the doctors were saying about it and how they said it was impossible. And then what happened then?
So, we got a second opinion. They agreed with the diagnosis that at the hospital we were at, and we sat down, or my husband sat down with the rabbi and, made a plan and basically the rabbi said that, and a doctor, and they said, as long as there's no hope, you don't have to do surgery just to do surgery according to Jewish law. So our plan was to repeat the test once the baby was born, survive birth, and then if they were the same as prenatally, we would just let nature take its course. If they were different by some miracle, and that was the shoestring of miracle hope that we were holding on to, then we'll reevaluate the situation. So that was the plan we had made.
Okay, and then what happened when the baby was born?
He came out alive. The birth was thankfully uneventful. They took him, they repeated the test, and they handed him back and said, it's the same as prenatally, so you have a few hours, a few minutes, we don't know. Enjoy your time. And that was it.
Okay.
And so we sat there, we tried to enjoy our time.
You tried to enjoy your time waiting for your baby to die, and then?
And he didn't.
But the baby didn't cooperate. Luckily, this miracle did not cooperate. This gift from God decided he wasn't going to cooperate with their prognosis, and
I don't know if you want the short end or the long end of the story.
Yeah, the middle version.
So the short end of that whole conversation was basically when about 6 hours or so, we had been told that we had a maximum of 6 hours to get him into surgery. So we tried to get a cardiologist
We were told this
involved.
before he was born, that those veins, the veins that weren't connected between the heart and lungs, they would constrict, and that surgery has a 6-hour window.
Uh-huh.
So we were told that.
At what point did you know that you wanted to try?
Well, we wanted to try really immediately, but when we saw that he was good.
So we obviously we wanted to try, but we also didn't want to put our child through something that there was no hope, so we were in this place of, we're not going to just shove him into surgery if there's literally no hope, which is what we were told time and time again. And we're not doctors, so what do we know,
Sure.
And multiple centers told us the same thing, and multiple doctors and multiple times. So, that was our plan, was like, we're not going to just cut him open to check it off the box. Kind of, that sounds horrible.
Sure, right.
But when he was approaching the 6-hour timeline, and he was really doing, by all measures, he was doing extremely well. He would turn a little bit violet every so often, and we would quickly massage him to try to get him back to somewhat of a normal color.
But he was, we were just holding him, and he was breathing on his own. He wasn't eating at that point. Hadn't fed him, so that wasn't, something. But we were just holding him and, trying to, like I said before, make every moment of his soul and his body together meaningful, right? So sort of trying as much as we could amid despite the grief and the sadness, to just be in the moment for his sake,
Right. Wow.
But then at 6 hours.
Yeah, the 6 hours, we wanted to get a cardiologist, because we said, listen, it seems like the information that you got is not matching up with what we see clinically.
Hmm.
And this is where we started to really, really struggle with the medical team, because they basically said, they looked at us as being clueless, and we looked at them as not being medically ethical, because they were not assessing the situation as it was. They were stuck on the diagnosis. And this was something that was significant, and this went on for actually several days. So they were pushing us into hospice care. They wanted us to go into hospice and let the baby die in front of his siblings, which was not something that we really planned as part of their educational curriculum specifically. Part of sarcasm, it comes. But that's kind of what they were not kind of. That's basically what they were pushing. They're like, oh, this is what some families do. It shows them a certain life. We're like, you are so warped you don't even realize it. And and that was, we were really struggling with it. So he was born Monday. This went on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday morning. Finally, we were ready to leave the hospital, because we just knew that we weren't getting any medical care.
Mm-hmm.
So at the very least, we needed to leave, because it had turned into like a real
stress.
Yeah, I think I described it in the book as a Morgan waiting, which was really what was going on.
So this baby who was supposed to die after a couple of hours defied them, lived for a few days, and you went home with the baby finally, just because they were just expecting the baby to die. And then what happened?
So, the only change that in their prenatal diagnosis and those few days was that he was eating by mouth, which initially they told us he had this whole GI thing. We don't know if he'll eat, and that really should have been a marker for them, like, oh, maybe the diagnosis is different than we thought, but they kept saying, no, it's not. So that was the only thing that changed, was that he was eating by mouth.
And that was that they told us, when they kind of reassessed things, they told us that he has heterotaxy syndrome, which is the internal organs are flipped upside down and backwards. So Nissi himself actually has two right sides. So all of us have a right side and a left side of our bodies. And that means, like, for example, on the lungs, we have 3 lobes on the right side of our lungs and 2 lobes on the left side. So he actually has 3 lobes on both sides. He only has the right ventricle. He doesn't have a spleen, because the spleen is on the left side, etc. So when we started feeding him, like Carachel mentioned, and he's not choking, he's not struggling, he's still breathing, he's doing fine, and he's basically doing everything that a baby should be doing. The question was, why are we not getting him into surgery? And we did not have a good answer. And it was only later that we were told that this doctor, or that we found out really, that this doctor had called Children's Hospital and told them that we refused surgical care, and that we instead opted for what do they call it? Palliative care, and basically to let things go. So that
Wow.
was really where we considered things to be really immoral. But where
Absolutely.
things turned was that Thursday night we went to sleep, and I'd like to say this is one of the dumbest things I've ever said in my life. I said to my wife, I said, if he's still alive tomorrow morning, we'll call doctors on the East Coast, and wherever we could find some kind of surgeon to be able to, wonder surgeon to try to do surgery. Now we were so delirious from exhaustion, physical, emotional, mental exhaustion. We simply weren't thinking straight. So we should have been calling cardiologists ourselves while we were in the hospital.
Mm.
But we simply were not capable of thinking that far out. Everything was really minute to minute, and so it's a different.
Well, it sounds like also you didn't have the supports of a medical team to help you with that. You're going through such a trauma, and here the medical team were not helping, but it sounds like they were fighting against you. So that made it even harder to do what you could have done.
Right, but we really did not even think about that simple idea. All right, this hospital is not giving us care. Let's find us another hospital that
Right.
will.
Right.
And we did not have the bandwidth, the mental bandwidth to think through
Sure.
the logical sequence.
Well,
And
so overwhelming, of course.
right,
Yeah.
and I agree with what you're saying. Sorry, that you're trying to balance being rational and being hopeful, and I think that's
Sure.
the struggle with in life in general. It's like we want to be rational and accept the situation, but we also want to be hopeful and hope that things will become better, right? And where do you find where do you strike the balance, and where do you put your energy, and what do you do? And that was something that I think we really struggled those few days, was really like we don't want to be these crazy people that don't believe the doctors, but we also feel like there's something up, and where do you what's really going on? In hindsight, I always say, and trust your instinct, and worst comes to worst, you keep asking and they say you're wrong. That's but in the moment you don't know, because you're not the doctor. And there's plenty of amazing doctors and nurses out there, not at all to bash doctors. We happened to get into a situation with the team that wasn't looking out for the best interests of our child and of us, and wasn't rethinking the situation and seeing, like Ellie said, the clinical situation, not just the diagnosis.
Right. Well, then you did find doctors though to work with, right? And then you.
That night, he was eating every 2 hours, and that night we had a funny little incident where basically, again, delirium being what it is, and Charach and I are very, very lucky. We're hitting on 18 years of marriage, and we're very blessed in terms of our communication and
I'm going to ask you about that in a minute after you finish the story. So.
We're lucky. So the part of this element is what kind of came to a crux at 4:00 in the morning, when my wife asked me to get me a bottle, to make a bottle of formula. So I did, and I neglected to screw the nipple on. And so she was obviously still asleep, and she says, "You didn't screw the nipple on." I said, "I'm sorry." She says, "You should be." I kind of get up again and go get a towel and clean it up and apologize again. And she says, "You should be. I can't believe you did that." So now I'm wide awake because my wife doesn't usually tell me off like that. And I thought to myself, why the heck am I going back to sleep? I need to start making some phone calls to people who can save my son. And this is basically the first rational thought I had in several days.
Wow. So the fog, the cloud of fog, I guess, just parted, and you started thinking. That's when you got him into surgery.
So, well, the first piece of good news was when somebody put us in touch with the cardiologist, who told us that you've been a victim of the right to die movement, which was basically, it's like, okay, there's definitely something to do. Go do it. And then we called Seattle Children's again, and we said, hey, we understand that you guys didn't want to take him because his case is extreme. And the cardiologist said, what are you talking about? We would never turn down a child. How quickly can you get here?
Wow.
And it was incredible, 80. And, we virtually flew to the hospital, and it was really, really an unbelievable change. And so the first surgery, that was Friday. We got there at 11 o'clock, I think it was, something like that, 10 or 11 o'clock
in the morning.
in the morning. And the surgery ended up being Shabbat morning.
Wow.
So that was into the second, I guess, if you want, of the adventures, again with on the short version,
Right.
without all the
Wow.
drama in between.
And how old is Nissi now?
5.5.
Wow. I'm gonna show a picture of your whole beautiful family. There he is, I guess. Is that him there at 5?
He's on my shoulders. Yeah, that picture's from already
Like
2.5 years ago. So yeah,
Wow. Okay. So miraculously, this baby that was not supposed to survive past a couple of hours or even less is now 5 years old.
So I want to add on to that basically there's that part of the story, and then there's the fact that the first surgery, what they do is they put in, it's called the Blaylock Taussig shunt, BT shunt. So that shunt was the only pathway to be able to have blood between the heart and lungs, and so that
it's almost like a stopgap until he gets old.
And so that shunt clotted
Mm.
when he was 29 days old, and they went into cardiac arrest, and they caught it in time, and that is really, really, really something that's kind of off the charts in terms of their capability to be able to catch this. It just happens to be that the nurse walked in and noticed a color change and called the other nurse in, and they immediately code blue, and there happened to be at 2:30 in the morning, there happened to be a respiratory therapist in the room next door who began CPR on him immediately.
Wow.
So what you see there is not just the picture of a kid who wasn't supposed to survive. It's also these other complexities that are tossed on top, and it's something that the entire medical crew that deals with him nowadays, and we're talking about cardiology, neurology, obviously his pediatrician, all of his therapists, there's something beyond that, and they're all cognizant of it because of the fact that usually where there's a BT shunt, number one, they don't catch it.
We're losing your sound again. Let's try again. Sorry, we lost you for a minute there. Now you're back.
The babies
No, you're not back. We're still not hearing you clearly.
usually survive, and even if they do survive, unfortunately, when
Where the sound seems to be going off and on. Okay, we lost them. Yeah, we lost you. I guess the Estrins were going to try to come back on. This is them now. This is them actually 2 years ago with their beautiful children. And we are going to ask them about their family, their beautiful family, and how the children actually dealt with it all. And what did they... Are you back on? Are we... Okay, no problem. Okay, we're going to see. Here we go. So I do want to ask you, how did you react to your children? We have this beautiful picture of your children here. How did you tell your children? What was your children's reaction? How did you deal with that? I mean, that's a whole different component, a whole other component besides for what you were going through.
So initially, prenatally, we tell them much, we did tell them that the baby's sick, but we didn't really tell them more than that, because we wanted them to know why we were stressed out, but we didn't want to give them real concrete information that we weren't sure of ourselves yet until the baby was born, and then we'd see what happened. Those first few days when he was, alive and we had no sort of care plan for him, initially we weren't going to bring them to meet him at all. We felt like, we spoke to professionals. They said it's too traumatizing, that, every family has their own method, but that was what we decided. But then as he didn't go along with the plan of a few hours or 12 hours, eventually we brought him in because we had a baby and why aren't they in the picture, you know?
Sure.
And we were really winging it at that point. We didn't know what we were going to do. We were just like, okay, well, we are clearly not writing this script. This is not what we all planned for. We'll just, you know, once we got him into surgery, so this was, you know, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Friday, Shabbat, Sunday, we very much, so he was in the hospital for 5 months until he got home. Yeah. And so we very much got them involved. You know, we tried to keep their life as regular as possible. So they went to school. We tried to be there for them in the evenings. We chose not to sleep in the hospital. But during the day, we'd go and visit him. And then we'd bring them to visit whenever, you know, whenever they wanted to, whenever it was stable enough that it wasn't super scary. And they were a huge part of his healing. You know, they would sing to him and bring him pictures, and you know, we didn't make them stay for a super long amount of time. You know, every kid was different what they wanted. It was sort of like some of the kids came in, looked, and ran off to play with the video games in the room, and other kids really had a lot of questions and wanted to understand, you know. And in general, children's hospitals have a tremendous siblings support system in place. So they really were amazing at, you know, toys and gifts for the kids, and we had someone come in and explain everything to them and answer questions. So that was, you know, sort of how we did it when he was in the hospital. When he came home, it was a whole nother thing we were dealing with, because he has cerebral palsy and he has a lot of medical stuff and he has a lot of physical disabilities, and his care is very time consuming. And up until about 3 months ago, we didn't have any help for him. So it was very, very time consuming. But we tried to be cognizant of it, and that was one of the reasons we actually left Seattle and moved to Miami, which is where we live now, is because we felt like we needed a bigger support system for our whole family. We needed a bigger Jewish community. We needed stronger school systems. We wanted to be able to have high school so we wouldn't have to send our kids away from home. So we felt like, you know, we needed more for all of us, not just for him. Because the truth is, for special needs kids, Miami's not the #1 city in the country, but we felt like as a whole family, so we always really try to think about everyone. And they are like his best support team. Like, they're amazing with him. They love him, they take care of him, they, you know, and I think
Nomi put him to bed tonight.
yeah, they're putting I think, like, what did Sheena say about, and he's also such a happy child that I think it goes, it's a two-way street. Like, he teaches them so much, you know, about life and challenges, and he thankfully is verbal and cognitive, so even though he can't walk, but he can talk and he can interact with them. So I think he's really, it's not been easy, but he's added, and I know it sounds so cliche, but he's really made us all better people. And I think the kids recognize that too, you know.
Wow.
More exhausted, but better people.
So I want to touch a little about what has this done for your marriage, because the medical, I mean, you touched on that before slightly, but I, you know, how medical crisis can really wreak havoc in a family. A special needs child could also put a tremendous amount of pressure on the family. What you've gone through has you've been through a lot of trauma. How has that affected your relationship with each other?
So we knew that going into it, and so therefore we've been very, very, very aware of that, and we kind of
do the best we can.
Yeah. that basically that we are the center of this family, and if the center core is strong, then everybody else will be able to handle, and so it's our responsibility to each other and to the rest of the family and to him to be able to maintain that the strength of our relationship around everybody else. And so that means that no matter the circumstances, we've always tried to communicate with each other. How are you feeling? How are you dealing? Do you need time? Do you need what do you need right now to be able to get through? You know, what's our long-term plan? What's our short-term plan? So constantly going through these conversations. You know, it is very different than you know, our pre-Nisi life. Loved going to parks and enjoying nature and that kind of thing. Our post-Nisi life, that is extremely difficult. He's basically, for all intents and purposes, wheelchair bound, if you want to put it that for the moment. For the moment, meaning, for
We have hopes.
we do have very strong. But so we need to be able to replace that. We need to be able to find new things, and so it's by
Still
no
a work
means
in progress.
exactly, by no means is it simple, but we know what we want, and that's basically, if you want to give it, it's a navigational process, as opposed to, okay, we've got all the answers. Like, okay, this is what we're aiming at. When things are slightly off kilter, we're sensitive enough to notice that, and to be able to bring it back. Okay, it's not where we want to be. We need to get back on this course, and it's a constant, juggle.
So I guess it's really a lot of open communication and keeping your eye on the ball about what you want to do and what you want your life to look like.
And I think also letting go of a lot of stuff.
Like what?
Know that some things are just not important. I mean, even our life goal of running a Chabad house and living in Seattle, we realized that we just couldn't juggle that and a family with a special needs kid. And so we had to let that goal go to focus on family,
Right. Wow.
And that's okay. Like, we had to come to terms with it, and thankfully we found other things, and we feel we're happy, we're okay, but really that's part of the reason, at least
Looks
for
like
me.
you guys are more than just okay. I'm sorry. I have to say you're really a lot more than just okay. You're really special, and I think the courage that you have and the way that you support one another is outstanding. Really outstanding.
We did get a trial run. One of our other kids was in the hospital for a few months when he was born, so we got a little bit of a trial run.
Oh, wow.
But I think that, this was one of the reasons. One of the things that kind of we agreed to write the book, or was that we sort of wrote a self-help section.
Why did you want to write a book? Tell us a little about that. What made you do that?
So there's different levels of it.
I guess I'll start because it was my.
Go ahead, because it was. I like to say he wrote the book and he dragged me along.
And I like to say that I wrote the information, the humor, and the sarcasm, and my wife put the soul into it.
Okay.
There would be no emotion in that book if I had written it myself. So it was very much a team effort, even though it's written in my voice. But this was really going back to the prenatal experience. When we pray every single day, there are certain messages, certain things that we say that pop out at you at different stages in life. And one of the things that we say that to me nowadays it rings so beautifully is chapter 30 of Tehillim, of Psalms. And one of the things that we say, there's a verse there that Ma betza b'dami brit al shachas. Basically, we're saying to God, what would it help if I go down to the grave? Hayotcha afar. Well, can dirt know you, appreciate you, express thanks to you? Hayagid amitecha, can it tell over your truth? And then we say Shema Hashem v'chaneni, Hashem, listen to me and answer me, have mercy on me, basically. And then the rest of the verse, the rest of the paragraph ends on a very, very exuberant note of thanks, and it's a really, really powerful chapter. So when I said these words, they really, really rang to me. I'm like, God, if you let this kid live, we have a story to tell. We have something to do with it. If not, what's the point? So this was like my little internal conversation with God, so to speak. And so after getting through it, the first couple times I told it to people, and they were kind of blown away by it. I wrote it for several reasons. I started writing it down and then sharing with people, and people were very, very touched by what was written, even though it was at that point in a very nascent state. But I very, very much felt that the story held was part of the purpose of his life, and it was incumbent upon me to kind of fulfill that promise, I suppose, so to speak, made to God. That was step one. I always knew that I wanted to have some kind of conclusions in it. But I didn't know what those conclusions would be and what we would want to tell people. And that it took us a while to be able to get to that point.
I think COVID also, I think, seeing the whole world go through COVID and reeling from this kind of, not the same experience, but, medical experiences, going, and then the things that we had learned, the mindsets that got us through it, the practical tips of like, I don't know, the one thing is coming to mind is like, let people help out, or don't worry about your kids' homework, or, whatever little practical tips that helped us get through it. We felt like we had stuff to share. So we sort of wrote the story of the first part, and then we wrote a self-help a little bit, second half of the book, which is both mindsets to families going through a medical crisis. One section is for medical teams, sort of the Jewish concepts and some of the things that, we were done right to, and some of the things that we were done wrong to. And then the third part is, for friends. So if you have a friend going through a medical crisis, what do? Everyone wants to help, but nobody knows necessarily what to do. So sort of some of the things that we learned, obviously it's within our experience, we asked people, we got some other people's input, but so that was sort of the driving force, sort of the final push to get us to write the book, and sort of shaped it, was sort of having that second section on top of the story, which
So what do you suggest people do when they're trying to help somebody going through a situation?
So I think first and foremost, recognizing where trying to put yourself in their shoes for like a minute or 30 seconds to recognize where, and then trying to see what you think they need. So whether, if maybe a lot of times they don't even know what they need. So bringing them some food, or maybe they need emotional support, just sitting there and talking to them. They usually probably don't need advice,
Mhm.
or, so sort of, I think, so that's sort of some of the things. But I think really first and foremost is really stopping for a second and looking at the person and thinking, if I was in that situation, what would I need? As opposed to sort of unburdening your maybe past traumas or whatever on that person. Because a lot of times I think we do that. And then very, very practical things like, I'm going to the grocery store, what can I buy you? As opposed to, what can I do to help? Because when you're in this
maelstrom,
you just almost don't even know what you need. But you need so much, you're so overwhelmed, you don't even know what to say. So like,
what kind of cereal do your children eat? Do your kids like schnitzel for dinner? Is somebody making you dinner have you eaten today? Those kind of practical things, as opposed to a nebulous, what can I do to help? The answer is, I don't know what you can do to help. And if you're asking me, honestly, go away. I have too many other things to deal with.
I can't come up with another answer, so I think
Right.
really, that's really, I think at the end of the day,
So
really
put yourself practically in that person's mindset and try to really figure out on a practical level what they might need.
Yeah.
Right. People sometimes want to help because they are do-gooders.
Mhm.
And that's that. I want to be careful saying this. I don't want to sound obnoxious or anything like that, because obviously you appreciate what everybody's trying to do, but at the same time, if a person's giving because they want to feel good, the chances are they're not going to give you what you need. And there was a wonderful person that I really, really love and appreciate. But when my oldest son, who was, my wife started saying, was a 26-week preemie, was in the hospital, he was so concerned, and he would ask me every single day, how's your son? How's your son? How's your son? But he wasn't really giving me any space. He wanted to be consoled. And I found it was exhausting to talk to him, even though, again, I really appreciate this person on so many different levels. A really, really fine person. But I didn't have the bandwidth to be able to deal with him because he was asking for himself.
Right.
Not doing that because he's a sweetheart of a guy and he honestly cared. But I was too exhausted to really, really deal with it. And I found it was just, it just, just make me absolutely wiped out anytime I had to speak to him. So it's that kind of thing that you have to be aware of. And so I think in terms of conversation, the main thing is to be very, very cognizant of what the person in front of you looks like. Do they want to listen to you? Do they want to speak to you? Do they want you there? Do they not want you there? And when you watch for those social cues, you'll be able to pick them up and you'll be able to give the person what they need. And
And I think also just very, very practical things that everyone can use, you know, a gift card, cash, cleaning help, dinner, all those things
Coffee.
don't go to waste, you know?
coffee.
And I appreciate
Coffee.
you know, all those like self-care things that you don't have time when you're in survival mode, you know?
We used to speak
Right.
about the hospital being almost in a different planet because it's just time is not the same. The seasons don't exist. You know, it's just, you're operating on a completely different plane, and so therefore you forget to eat, and that sounds silly. You know, you forget to go get yourself some food. But if you're living off of the handful of snacks that you have in the parents' room, and you know that you bought for the kids 4 days ago, you know the chances are you're actually not able to take care of yourself, and let alone your child. So when people brought us food to the hospital, that was really just phenomenal. There was a bowl of soup that in a later hospitalization that one of the women in Boston brought us, that my wife and I can still
We still
taste.
remember.
It was you know, the term in Hebrew is mechaya nefesh. It literally gave us life from this thermos of piping hot soup. It was really incredible.
And then I think also just one other thing that just came to mind. I think really just showing you care, you know, in a practical way. You know, everyone has different things that they can give in different ways and different financial means, but it's really showing up and showing that you care, you know, even a text message, you know, I'm thinking about you, I just want to let you know. Like that really, because you get so isolated and you're in such a different zone. And then also just like we had a friend who took our kids out to the toy store and bought them toys and took them out to this store or whatever. That was huge, just so that we can know that they're having a good time and we don't have to worry about them for those few hours, you know?
Right. No, these are great examples. These are, because sometimes people really want to help, but they don't know what to do. So these are great examples. Okay, we're really running out of time here. I really want to thank you. I want to thank Rabbi Eli and Chaya Rachel Estrin, authors of Medicine, Miracles, and Mindsets. Really a tremendous book. I really enjoyed reading it. It was beautiful. Can you share with us one last thought that people who are going through something difficult, some of the Rebbe's teachings that perhaps have helped you and helped you stay focused and helped you to, what message would you like to share with people out there who are going through such hard times or going through some kind of trauma?
I'll tell you, there's a beautiful idea that that we wrote in the book that rang true for a long time, but here was particularly powerful. And tonight, of course, is the 12th and 13th of Tammuz, which is the previous Rebbe's birthday and the day he was freed from Soviet prison. And so this is actually a quote of his. The Mishnah tells us that every person is obligated to say that the world was created for me. And there are many different ways to interpret this very enigmatic idea, but the previous Rebbe's idea is just mind-blowing. He explains that the word olam, that the world was created for me, has 4 different meanings. It means obviously a physical world, so space. It also comes to the term ilem, which means youthful strength. There's also a connotation of time. Le'olam bahem tavodu is 50 years or forever, but there's time there. And also the world, as those who have studied Hasidic teachings talk about Helen, concealment. And he explains that the concealment, that a person needs to look at their world and say, the concealment of God that I am coming across, in other words, the issues, whatever they are in my world, I've been given, in this particular time, in this particular place, I've been given the strength to be able to reveal what's behind that concealment. And so the idea is that, you know, when we're given a particular issue, this is mine, this is my struggle. This is my struggle, not for the purpose of struggle, but for the purpose of revealing what's behind it. And that's ultimately the purpose of a miracle, is to be able to show that God's running the show. But that's also the purpose of a challenge, also to show that God's running the show, for us to be able to recognize that this is a godly experience and to absorb it as such.
Wow, beautiful, beautiful. Thank you again, Rabbi Eli and Chaya Rachel Estrin.
One last little note, my wife found out that the book is actually going to be officially released in about a month or so.
Wow.
It is on the ship on the way to the United States, and it's available for pre-order at medicinemiraclesmindsets.com.
Okay, medicinemiraclemindsets.com.
Medicinemiraclesmindsets.com.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Rachel and Ellie Estrin. The beautiful book of medicine, miracles, and mindsets. You guys are a real inspiration. Beautiful. You've confronted the challenge in your world, in your olam, and you've added so much light to so many people all over through your example and through your words and through the courage that you've displayed. Thank you so much. I want to just bless you that you should only see tremendous nachas, Jewish nachas, Yiddish nachas, Hasidic nachas from all your children, and we should only hear good things and continued miracles with with Nissi and with all your children.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us. Very
Have a good
inspirational. Thank you. Good night.